The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
Okay, so for me, this was like an unbelievable thing to find out, right? For me, this was a blockbuster moment today. So we know that Ukraine and the defense minister and Zelensky and everybody else, they don't want Russia to know that they're freaking out. They don't want Russia to know that they're desperate. And this is why Zelensky did not let on to anybody in the press or in any other venue that they did not get the money that they needed to defend themselves from Russia's Donbass Eastern Ukrainian war. All right, he didn't tell anybody, but he is desperate, and privately he's telling, Bill Taylor, he doesn't know what to do. Okay, Donald Trump gets on the phone with Zelensky, as we all know, on September 25th. We only have a record of the call that Donald Trump wants us to have. It's missing a whole bunch of stuff, but even the stuff that he released is damning. It's really, really bad because he's telling them Hunter Biden. He's telling them investigations. He's telling them, I need a favor. He's telling them you're not getting, aid unless you do this for me, and then I'll do that for you. That's a quid pro quo. Okay. But then the day after that phone call, the day after, Sondland calls up Donald Trump to discuss how it went because they didn't get readouts of the call right away. And Donald Trump is screaming on the phone to Sondland, what about the investigations? When are we gave him the money and I don't have my investigations. And crazily enough, Bill Taylor's staff member, who I'm sure will be added to this witness list. I mean, we have a whole bunch of witnesses that they put out last night for next week, because this is going to go on for the next week. It'll go on Friday. We'll hear from Maria Jovanovic. And then next week, we're supposed to hear from Volker and Tim Morrison and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Laura Cooper at the Department of Defense and Fiona Hill and a whole bunch of others. I expect that we'll hear from this guy, this staffer to Ambassador Bill Taylor, who was in the car. And the president was yelling so loudly that he could hear him.
Last Friday, a member of my staff told me of events that occurred on July 26th.
Day after.
While Ambassador Volker and I visited the front, this member of my staff accompanied Ambassador Sondland. Ambassador Sondland met with Mr. Yermak. Following that meeting, in the presence of my staff at a restaurant, Ambassador Sondland called President Trump and told him of his meetings in Kyiv. The member of my staff could hear President Trump on the phone asking Ambassador Sondland about the investigations. Ambassador Sondland told President Trump the Ukrainians were ready to move forward. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for. At the time I gave my deposition on October 22nd, I was not aware of this information. I'm including it here for completeness. As the committee knows, I reported this information through counsel to the State Department's legal advisor, as well as to counsel for both the majority and the minority of this committee. It is my understanding that the committee is following up on this matter.
So that right there is a blockbuster piece of information, okay? And that is just frightening. So it wasn't in a car, I'm sorry. Sondland is in Ukraine. So is Bill Taylor. So is George Kent. They're all in Ukraine at this point because this is where they work. And Sondland calls President Trump from a restaurant, not a car. Sorry, my bad. And asks him, what do you think about Ukraine? And Donald Trump is screaming into the phone, what about my investigations? What about my investigations? And the staffer hears it, and Sondland tells the staffer he cares more about Biden than he does about Ukraine. I mean, this is just bizarro world. And of course, he reports this, Bill Taylor, the ambassador, reports this through the chain of command. Okay, he doesn't go public and he doesn't write an op-ed, and they all respect the chain of command. They all do. Now, this is just harrowing. And then Val Demings had a really good exchange. This was really straight and to the point. Val Demings is from Florida. She's a Democrat, obviously. And she asked, do you think that Donald Trump had, or Rudy Giuliani had, American interests at heart when they were doing this shadow diplomacy? Did they care about our national security?
Both of you have explained that you grew seriously concerned when you realized that the interests of this irregular channel diverged from official U.S. policy and interests. Was Mr. Giuliani promoting U.S. national interests or policy in Ukraine, Ambassador?
I don't think so, ma'am.
Mr. Kent?
No, he was not.
What interests do you believe he was promoting, Mr. Kent?
I believe he was looking to dig up political dirt against a potential rival in the next election cycle.
Ambassador Taylor? What interests do you believe he was promoting?
I agree with Mr. Kent.
The State Department's role is to promote U.S. policies overseas, not to help the current president win re-election. Is that correct, Mr. Kent?
All federal government employees are subject to the Hatch Act, and our actions are supposed to be promoting policy and not involved in partisan politics.
Ambassador Taylor?
I agree.
Holy crap. This did not go well. And of course, like I said, sweaty Devin Nunes, he was beside himself. He didn't know what to do. So he had to attack the process.
The witnesses deemed suitable for television by the Democrats were put through a closed-door audition process in a cult-like atmosphere in the basement of the Capitol, where Democrats conducted secret depositions.
Yeah, except that's not true because the attorney for the Republican side, Mr. Castro, he sat in on all the depositions. In fact, like we said a million times, 100, Republicans were allowed to go into the depositions and ask any questions. And they're not interested in the truth at all. They're just interested in pounding the table and speechifying. Calling it a cult-like atmosphere to take a deposition is very bizarre. I've never heard of a deposition being called a cult-like thing. It is a daunting thing. Usually, there's no objection there's no objections allowed in a deposition. It's just you could object to the form of the question, meaning my person over here that she didn't understand what you're asking her. That's about it. So they just pounded the table today, and they got caught is basically what happened. The idea that the money was released all right, but the money wasn't released until the administration became aware of the fact that a whistleblower report was deemed urgent and credible by the Inspector General of the intelligence community and was supposed to go to Congress. And as soon as they learned that Congress was going to learn about this extortion plan, they said, well, then just release the money. At least we'll have a defense. That is what happened. After the fact, when they released the money, Donald Trump was still pounding on the table and screaming at the mega donor, Gordon Sondland, what about my investigations? Now what? What's going to happen? I need dirt on Biden. Without regard to our national security interests or the lives of Ukrainians.